Hello and welcome to Fulham Fan News. Tonight we're delighted to be joined by one of the world's leading sports journalists and broadcasters, Ben JACOBS. How are you doing?
Great to be here. Looking forward to talking all things Fulham.
Lovely. It's great to have you on and great to discuss things to do for Fulham for a little bit. Also joining us is Fulham Fan News regular Joe. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm happy to be here. Transfer window is starting to kick off, so got a lot to talk about. Busy summer ahead of us.
Yep, got lots to talk about, including transfer targets, some possible departures, and Marco Silva's role at the club in general as well. Ben, I'd just like to start by congratulating you and Leicester City on your promotion back to the Premier League.
Thank you. I sort of want to celebrate, but part of me is waiting to see how big the alleged points deduction that's coming is before I get too excited about our longevity in the division.
Still a great achievement. So I'm sure you were celebrating when you lifted the trophy. So
yeah, I mean, it was a wonderful season under a manager that now we've lost as well. So it reminds me actually of Fulham. If we go back to kind of 12 months ago, you may remember the big Saudi move for Mitrovic. That was a saga. Willian leaving, rejoining, maybe going Saudi, and then talk at the same time that Marco Silva might depart. And Leicester feels the same in terms of uncertainty and departures, but it is, of course, fantastic to be back in the Premier League.
Yeah. Well, let's get dug in really. And to start off with, I'd like to know what are your thoughts ahead of an expectedly busy summer for Fulham FC?
Yeah, I think it's normal that it's going to be busy for Fulham, and some of the wish list for Marco Silva is historical. That's kind of bled into this summer, particularly around needing another forward, maybe, despite the fact that when they got Broja, they managed to suddenly have a scoring spree from Maynooth, and it meant that they didn't really need Broja as much. But I still think there's that desire to bring in another forward. And then, of course, at the same time, we have to monitor the Palhinha situation. And it's very possible that another midfielder comes in. And then with Tosin's departure, a centre-back as well is high on the list of priorities, maybe even two, potentially, because we know that Tim Ream is very likely. In fact, it's virtually done, from what I understand, going back off to America to be part of that build up to the 2026 World Cup. So Fulham are going to have bodies out, and that will free up some space, free up some wage bill, and obviously free up a little bit of budget. But there are, as with many, those PSR concerns as well. So they're going to have to do smart business rather than necessarily big business, unless, of course, they get that kind of money they're looking for Palhinha that might just give them a little bit more leeway to move in the market.
Yeah, I mean, we'll touch on it a bit more in a minute, but of course we still have the Mitrovic money from last year as well to use to our advantage. So we'll have to see what happens with that. Joe, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to bringing in a winger. I think we've heard rumours about Bobby Reid potentially leaving. It's kind of a bit angsty whether he's going to sign onto that new contract or not. I've seen us linked to, is it Silas, the Stuttgart winger? I think he'd be an exciting addition. As Ben mentioned, a striker. I think we've seen that Muniz is capable. However, I'd still like that stability. I know that we're getting Jay Stansfield back, and we'll have him as potentially a backup striker. Obviously, we're going to be keeping Raul Jimenez. I doubt he'll be leaving when he's earning 100k a week. But I'd like to see us bring in another striker to properly challenge Muniz, and then obviously, as Ben said, the centre back is key.
Yeah, I think we can definitely see most of those places being strengthened over the summer. I think we've been rumoured with plenty of people, and I think one of the main ones, I think, if it depends if Palhinha leaves, in my opinion. I think if Palhinha is going to be off to Bayern, as it's been rumoured, I think the first priority would be getting a midfielder in. To fill that gap in the same way that we sort of papered over the gap of Mitrovic last summer, but then made it through. So, but with the money and the freedom this summer, and hopefully we can back Marco Silva, and he can, like, if we get the transfers he wants and the players that he wants, then he can do his stuff, because we've seen he brought in Willian, did wonders with Willian. Jimenez last season took a while to get him going, but he did work wonders. So anything is possible under Marco Silva with this Fulham side, and it's a really exciting project, which I hope we can kick on with in the summer. So, do you see any limits in Fulham's budgets this summer, Ben?
I think there's limits in everyone's budget, only in the sense that PSR continues into next season, even though we've got these new shadow so-called squad cost control rules. We won't go into that, otherwise people will fall asleep very early in this show. But the old financial rules will bleed into next year. The new ones are just being shadow trialed, and the market's inflated. And I think Fulham found this in the summer, where everyone was kind of nonchalantly saying at the point when Fulham were in the conversation, Broja, you can buy him for 35 million if you like. And Fulham was saying, hang on a minute, that I believe would be a club record for Fulham. So it's getting to the point now where anybody that is a solid Premier League player that can hopefully give you longevity if they're young is a kind of club record for, I would say, half the Premier League. So you can't take these figures lightly if you're Fulham. So I don't think they're so restricted by the financial rules because, as you say, they got a very healthy fee for Alexander Mitrovic, but it's more just down to need, and you'd much have preferred to keep Tosin despite the fact that he obviously wanted another challenge, and then know that that's covered and you don't have to spend on that position. So the balance for Fulham, I think, is not about a set amount that they can or can't spend. It's more just the volume that they may have to do. And they could lose a couple of players as well. It wouldn't remotely surprise me if with Willian, another Saudi bid comes in and he tries what Mitrovic tries. There's nothing advanced at this point, but you might lose someone unexpectedly and again have to replace them. So it's all really about Fulham working collectively in their business to keep within a set budget. And I think bring in 3 or 4 players. And when you think of 3 or 4 quality Premier League players, unless you can find somebody on a free transfer, you're suddenly looking at a collective spend of 50, 60, 70 million. And that's when that one big player without the Palhinha money and even with the Mitrovic fee might become a little bit more problematic. So I still expect them to be quite cautious in the market. And I think that's been a frustration of Marco Silva. It's great news. Obviously, the project's moving in the right direction. And also, despite the speculation 12 months ago that he stayed and he extended and all of that, but there's still those slight doubts about whether the finances and the model can meet the ambition. And this is why, even though there's the commitment to Fulham and the project and there's no panic and chaos, you may have noticed in the last 24 hours, the surprise name in the conversation for the potential Manchester United vacancy that never emerged was indeed Marco Silva. And the very fact that he has that conversation is not a disrespect to Fulham or any indication that he wants to walk out the door imminently. But by the same token, you don't take a meeting unless at least a small percentage of you at least wants to hear out another project. So this is the sort of crossroads that Fulham's at the moment. You have to keep pace with all of these other clubs in a difficult financial climate with financial rules that are restrictive, and hope in a very congested London market that you can move in the right direction, which for Fulham is pushing towards a European spot. And it's difficult without spending and taking a bit of a risk reward strategy. But obviously Silva may want to do that, but his financial people may be pulling him back and saying, I'm sorry, that's not how the football club works. Otherwise, we're not going to be sustainable. So there's always that kind of balance, and the manager will never always get his way. But I still expect Fulham to do some productive business over the course of the coming weeks. And as I said before, if Palhinha leaves, it might be a blessing in disguise. Nobody wants him to go, but if he goes, and he was 1 foot in the door at Bayern 12 months ago, then it just might unlock a bit more kitty to allow Fulham to bring in 2 or 3. So you lose 1 Palhinha, but maybe you get 3 players in return.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it, because I know for a fact I speak on behalf of the whole Fulham fan base with the frustration of Fulham leaving their business till quite near the end of the window, which does cause frustration, but also like it wobbles the uncertainty even more, because we just edge closer to the start of the season with the squad we still have, and we haven't brought in many names, and it all starts panicking. And people think Marco's going to leave, and it all goes round. I think one of the main things for Fulham fans at the moment is Marco Silva staying is the one unquestionable thing, because I think he's the core of the project, and I think if he's here, then we have a certain future of where the project's going. So I think the Palhinha money, to be fair, if you had the Palhinha money, Ben, where would one position that Fulham would need to strengthen be?
Yeah, I mean, first let's just allude to the Palhinha potential, and Fulham's position is that the price hasn't changed 12 months on. So you want Palhinha, you stump up what you would have had to pay 12 months ago. And Bayern are Bayern, and they've got some money, but they did also spend big on a player like Harry Kane. So they're trying to get value like any club. So this negotiation and ultimately 2 rejected bids at the time of recording is now going to take us to a point where if Bayern want to succeed, it is likely to have to go above 50 million euros, and some would say above 50 million pounds. And the Fulham position will be even higher. It will be closer to 60, but there's always a little bit of middle ground in any negotiation. So if Fulham got their way and got 60 million or even 50 million, they would be in a position, I think, to immediately unlock a midfielder of that Andre mold. And I mention Andre because he's still available, and Fulham don't need to do any work on the negotiation because it didn't fall through because they were not able to agree a deal. It fell through because in the end, it was always contingent on we're only going to spend that outlay on Andre if Palhinha goes. And that was the case in January, in particular, mid-season, when there was a lot of speculation, there was a lot of will they, won't they, there was a lot of pushback on this notion that Fulham already had placed the offer or had agreed anything. And my understanding is still the same, that it was all pre-lined up, but it was kept quiet and denied until the point where maybe Palhinha would have gone. And we knew that Bayern in the end didn't want to move in January. Now they're moving, so there's no reason why Fulham wouldn't revisit that, because he wasn't just a target that they considered or thought about a bid for. They flew over there, they pre-agreed a deal, and they were very willing to move if they got themselves into a position financially where they had that Palhinha money to spend, but obviously stayed, and now we're back where we started again. So I think if Palhinha leaves, it's that Andre type player, and very well, maybe Andre specifically, that would make a lot of sense to get over the line and quickly to show that it's one out and immediately a talented and big name coming in. And if Fulham don't move for Andre, then somebody else I expect will, and very quickly this summer. So there may be a little bit of urgency if Palhinha deal gets done early to then move in that direction.
Yeah, I certainly agree that I think if Palhinha is to leave, I think it needs to be in the next couple of weeks. So then we at least have the time for it to settle with amongst fans, and then for us to get someone in immediately, as you say, because I think that will certainly be positive signs for the window. Joe, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think obviously it's a huge shame that it is looking like we're going to lose Palhinha. However, I've kind of come to terms with it. So it doesn't feel like that big of a blow. Last year, I remember I was getting on a flight on deadline day when this whole thing, and I remember thinking, oh my gosh, if this plane lands and I look at my phone and I see Palhinha's gone to Bayern, it's going to feel like the world's ending, the world's falling apart. But it actually feels like, first of all, I feel like he deserves the move. You know, he's fantastic. Anyone who watches him even once knows that he is absolutely amazing, and he deserves to be playing at the top level. I saw a statistic today, which was that if Fulham get what we want for Palhinha, then he'll become the most expensive. It'll be the highest fee ever paid for a defensive midfielder above the age of 28, which I think is very impressive that we're able to negotiate deals like that. The thought of signing a player like Andre really excites me. I can't say I've watched much of Brazilian football, but just the thought of signing someone that obviously has this potential. He's had interest from big clubs. He's played for Brazil. It really excites me, and it's a deal that I'd like to get done quickly, as in selling Palhinha, so that we can move forward. I think worst case scenario would be that we leave it until the end of the window and we're stuck kind of chasing our tails. And like Ben said, perhaps Andre's been snapped up by another club. Ben, I just have a question for you. Do you think that Andre's injury at the minute might affect Fulham's transfer business with him?
Not necessarily. I think when you have a 22-year-old, injuries are less of a concern unless they find any new information in terms of chronic or ultimately within the due diligence, something that might put them off. There was one instance with the Club Bruges forward Antonio Nusa, who obviously can play wide and versatile in lots of different positions. And Brentford thought they got that over the line. And then when they did the medical, they uncovered new issues with a relatively worrying knee issue and a back problem, and they said, okay, it's not worth the outlay anymore. So the injury shouldn't be an issue, and Fulham would do any due diligence if they choose to proceed to make sure that it doesn't change the deal or the price. And of course, the player would still ultimately have to do a medical where they could look at it and assess it. So I think when you're in a January window, or when you've got an older player, or when they have an injury that you think, okay, it's going to be a write-off in the short term, at that point, you can back off and turn to other targets. But I think in this particular issue, it won't be something that precludes them from moving. And you never know. Sometimes you can use it to try your luck and try and knock off a couple of million or something off the package. I've seen that a lot, where you say, okay, I know it's only an injury, I know there'll be a recovery, but our medical staff have ran over the player and we think it's caused because of X, Y, and Z. That might be a persistent issue, a structural abnormality, or something that could be chronic and come back. And you go back and you say, okay, let's try and get a better deal. So you can sometimes, in a perverse way, use it to your advantage. But I don't think the injury will be a stumbling block if they choose to proceed.
I know for a fact that Andre would be a great signing. So and fingers crossed we can get him through the door if Palhinha is on his way out as well. Another name that I think we touched on briefly earlier that could be on the way out is Bobby Decordova-Reid. He's been quite a clutch player for Fulham this season. He's popped up with some important goals here and there, most notably against Arsenal, the winner back at the start of the year. A rumoured figure to come in and replace him, Ben, has been Bruun Larsen of Burnley. He's been rumoured for about 6 million, I believe, as a fee. He's been all right with Burnley. He's got 6 goals in the season. What are your thoughts on him if he was to come in and join Fulham?
Yeah, it's one option at the time we're recording. There's nothing advanced. I think Fulham would be sad to see Bobby Decordova-Reid depart, and some of the clubs linked with him are not as active as perhaps have been suggested. Everton in particular was the one that was supposedly pushing very hard. And again, at this stage, they've got a lot of moving parts before they can think about doing any business. But there's obviously opportunism, not just because Burnley have gone down, but in addition to that, because they've lost their manager in Vincent Kompany. So it's all changed there. And there would be a lot of appeal about moving to a club like Fulham. The only sort of downside is that, as my information suggests, James Trafford to Newcastle is getting quite close to being done, and Burnley are pushing for a fee of somewhere in the region of 20 million. And if they get that kind of money, then they're going to be in a slightly stronger position in the market. I think, as Joe mentioned before, Silas is the other one to keep an eye on, but is more expensive. And Stuttgart are one of the clubs that are very serious about Amari Hutchinson, who could be available on a permanent deal at the right number. Chelsea see that number as 25 million or somewhere around that mark. And if they're successful in getting Amari Hutchinson, we know, of course, that Ipswich would love to re-sign him as well, but it's a lot of money. So Ipswich's downside on that deal is that they're thinking about the structure as perhaps a loan with an obligation to buy that only kicks in if they stay up, whereas Stuttgart are maybe prepared to advance Amari Hutchinson and do a straight deal. And then if it gets to the point where they sign someone like Hutchinson, then Silas is likely to be available and probably in the bracket of the 10 million mark. So again, we're sort of seeing a pattern here with both names, where Fulham are trying to bring in 4 or 5 in 3 or 4 core positions. And if they can get a few in under 10 million, then it might just give them that ability, coming back to the Palhinha money, or you might say the Mitrovic money, to make a statement signing in Andre, but still have that 15, 20, 25 million left to add another lead and established striker. Because as far as the goals are concerned, I don't think they're looking for somebody young and up and coming and relatively unknown, which is why they wanted established Premier League talent in Broja. And established Premier League talent, whether they're playing in England or not, tends to be double the kind of amounts that we've spoken about with the other names. So they're obviously going to have to do a balancing act, because if it's 7 to 10 million on the names that we've just mentioned, then they need a centre-back, then they need a wide player, and then they need a forward. Then if you add all of that up, even modestly, we're kind of creeping into that 70 million outlay, 80 million total outlay. at which point you can say net spend wise, Palhinha will be offset by that. So their net spend might actually end up being only 5 or 10 million. They might be quite happy with that. They don't have to dip into the Mitrovic reserves. So that's the only other thing I'd say. Like every single window I get asked, how much can my club spend? And what you should look at it as how much is my club's net spend, because they'll budget a net spend. So if they are resigned financially on the books to losing Palhinha for a minimum number, then if that minimum number's higher, if their net spend is, let's just call it for example's sake, 25 million, then if Palhinha ends up going for 60 million, they suddenly say, okay, we might be able to go to 85 million, and that allows you to function all of these positions. So it's not total spend that is a relevant number, because ultimately if Palhinha goes for 200 million and the net spend is 25 million they're looking for, then they can spend 225 million in that example. So it's all about doing shrewd business. And this is why I think Fulham are holding out for a much higher number than so far Bayern have been willing to pay.
Yeah, I think it comes down to that sort of smart business that you mentioned at the beginning, the way Fulham are going about it, which is great to see. And I think there's a plethora of other players that have been rumoured as well, which I think will kind of come into what you've just said there. Joe, are there any players that you've seen that could be on the way in?
Yeah, a couple that excite me. Emile Smith-Rowe. I think we've seen Marco Silva's ability to transform players that might be kind of shadows of their former selves. Obviously, Smith-Rowe's had quite a tough time at Arsenal as of late, lacking appearances. When you look back a few years ago towards kind of COVID season, he was playing really well for Arsenal, one of their key players. I think Marco Silva could bring out that Emile Smith-Rowe that we saw then. That I like that deal as well because he's young. We know that last season, I'm pretty sure last season, Fulham had the oldest squad in the league. So it would be nice to kind of get some youth in so that we're kind of even more looking towards the future. Who else have we been linked to? Run me some names.
Ryan Sessegnon's another one that springs to mind.
There we go. Yeah, good thinking. Ryan Sessegnon is one where my heart is telling me, yes, please come home. I know that there's obviously injury issues and question marks around his ability. Is he actually good enough for where we want to go as a club? But it just seems so right that he should come home and he'd be so welcome back. And I don't think there would be any. I have seen a couple Fulham fans kind of saying, let's steer away and it's not worth the risk. But I think it is worth the risk. First of all, it would be on a free. Sure, he might have quite high wage demands, but I think giving a player who, once again, is still quite young, he can play left back, left wing. That's one that really excites me. I'd love for Ryan Sessegnon to
roll
come
back
home.
the years.
Exactly.
That's what we need to do. But yeah. Hopefully we can get some of them through the door. Ben, are there any other players that we may not have mentioned that you think could be good business for Fulham?
Yeah, first of all, just on those two, with Ryan Sessegnon, I think West Ham were giving that one a look. With Emile Smith-Rowe, it's concrete interest from Fulham. I can confirm that. We know that a bit more historically, Aston Villa were looking, but not in the mix at the moment. And West Ham, again, tried and failed for a loan move for Emile Smith-Rowe. Actually, it's not about convincing Arsenal, it's about convincing Smith-Rowe, because window after window for the last few anyway, when he's been linked with a move away, he's been reluctant. He's wanted to try and force his way into the reckoning. And his time may now have come, and it will be a exit, if it happens, that kind of divides the Arsenal fan base, because I think a lot want to see him come through and be rewarded for coming through the club system and make an impact. And others just feel like if it was going to happen, it would have happened. So maybe the time now is to part ways. So Fulham could be one to watch there, but I would also keep an eye on Napoli. And they've just got a new sporting director, Giovanni Manna, who used to be at Juventus, and Antonio Conte, who's come in. And they're looking for some big business. And even though it won't quite be billed this way, they're budgeting, if not confirming publicly, on the assumption that Victor Osimhen will leave for somebody. And that will allow them, should that happen anyway, the funds, a bit like Fulham with Palhinha, in order to move. So Romelu Lukaku is one option, and Emile Smith-Rowe is on their list as well. So I would keep an eye on Smith-Rowe because I think that there's a genuine substance to it, but it wouldn't surprise me if he ends up going abroad. And then Ted Mengi is the other name that I would mention as well. I think Marco Silva's a big fan of the player. And like I said before, it's not just about Tosin, it's also about Tim Ream, because the likelihood is that move to the MLS side, Charlotte FC, will be finalised. And then there's a shortage, isn't there? Arguably by two, because you've got Calvin Bassey and Issa Diop, but I can't think of too many more, not within the senior squad. You'll know more than me. There might be some young players that you're aware of that could potentially come through. So Mengi, again, ticks a lot of boxes because he's young. He might be available because Luton have got relegated. He's got Premier League experience. And I actually thought, in a weird way, because Luton obviously went down, so that normally equates towards goals, but goals doesn't mean, in a side like Luton, when you concede them, bad defensive performances. And I thought that Mengi and Alfie Doughty were both outstanding last season for Fulham. So that would be, for Luton, I should say. So that would be a smart bit of business for Fulham.
Yeah, definitely agree. I mean, Mengi is one of the I definitely would be interested in seeing come to the door now that Tosin's left and walked down the road. But yeah, Joe, what are your thoughts on Mengi? Did you see him much last season?
I didn't watch too much of Luton last season, or I didn't focus too much on him. But I've looked into the statistics, and I think he fits the role of what we want. Once again, I've mentioned it a couple of times now. He brings down our squad age, which is something that I think is important if we want to kind of always be looking forward. Touching on Tim Ream, I think it is a shame that we're going to be, or it looks like we're going to be losing him. I think if you look 2 seasons ago, who would have thought he had a perfect Premier League season, played close to every single game, except for when he broke his arm or something, and that had him out for a couple games. And I think it's really nice that he got that kind of run out at the end when we knew Tosin was leaving. And I wish that we knew that this was our last time we were going to be seeing Tim Ream play for us. And it would be nice if he is still here for a friendly and we can have some sort of testimonial for him, because he is kind of a modern day club legend. He's been here for so long. Him and Kearney have kind of taken that captain role, and that I feel like he's done so much for the club, and he's been here through thick and thin, and that is disappointing. And I think that will leave a bigger hole in my heart than Tosin, to be honest.
Definitely agree with that. I think it would leave a bigger hole in my heart than when Mitrovic departed as well. He's been through thick and thin with us. He's got a lot of stick from the fans, but they also still love him deep down. So he's come a long way, and he would be one to definitely be sad to lose. Ben, just one final thought on Marco Silva. Obviously, he's had 2 successful seasons in the Premier League now. What do you think that he brings to this Fulham side that maybe we've missed in managers in the past when we've attempted to survive in the Premier League?
Well, I think there's just a clear identity, but there's also a move stylistically and in terms of the signings that he has been able to make or preside over towards progress that has Fulham not about just staying in the Premier League, but about moving in the right direction and ultimately trying, if they possibly can, to qualify for European football. It's tough in a Premier League that's competitive, and especially when you look at last season and Fulham ultimately 13th. So you wouldn't necessarily put them that close towards Europe, but all you need is 3 more wins in a season and 47 points suddenly jumps up. And anything, I think, in the high 50s stands an outside chance of getting at least Conference League football. So they're not far off. One thing I think Silva's done really well is not only developed a clear pattern of play and identity, but made Fulham very strong at home. And they've got some big results there. I think, for example, to the 3-0 thrashing of Tottenham, which I think was in mid-March. And the Silva style in a 4-2-3-1 in that game is perfect for Muniz, who obviously went on a scoring spree in the back half of the season, but he gets the best out of the fullbacks. I think Robinson absolutely outstanding. We haven't mentioned him, but keeping him utterly essential for Fulham and their progress. And then that system allows the two holding midfielders like Palhinha and whoever else comes into that slot should he depart to really thrive and have protection when necessary. So really well organised, good shape, good identity, strong home form, and maybe culturally a bit less of a kind of underdog mentality playing against big teams, especially at home. We don't really see Fulham do anything other than stick to their principles, and they scored a lot of goals at home, and they've beaten sides comfortably on their day when they play to their potential, because they haven't changed that style or that system dramatically, whether they're playing a bottom of the table side or a top one. And when they get going, it's easy on the eye, they're clinical. And I think that's about his identity. That's about his serial winning mentality that maybe has been lacking in the past. So all it needs is a bit more depth and things are moving in the right direction.
Definitely. I think one thing which has definitely stood out last season more than most was our away form. It was quite a disappointment in comparison to our home form. Is that something that you think Fulham should definitely look to improve on going forward?
Yeah, I mean, everyone wants to improve on the away form, but ultimately, if you lock in strong home form, then you're in a position where you're not looking behind your shoulder. And then every away point that you get moves you one step closer to challenging for European football. And I agree, the away form was not consistent, although they won at Old Trafford, I think, in February, which sort of shows what they're capable of, even though that's only one game. But generally away from home, you're right, they didn't keep too many clean sheets. They threw away a lot of points as well, and they gave sides head starts. You think to that incredible and dramatic salvage draw against Sheffield United, but you can't be giving Sheffield United, with low confidence and basically already down at that time, the ability to score 3 goals against you at home. I thought that they were dreadful away at Wolves as well in March. It was only a 2-1 score, I believe, but it was a late Fulham goal. And that's the kind of disappointment when you get that buzz at Craven Cottage and you think we're scoring, we're free flowing, we're beating top half of the table teams. And then you go to a very average Wolves side and lose. You go away at Sheffield United and lose. They lost, I think, after that from memory, away at Nottingham Forest as well on the road. And you're like, yikes. And it's not just about the away form, it's about that consistency. They can't have these lulls. The more I think about it, the more that March, April period leading to also a home defeat to Newcastle, it put them right out of the picture for any kind of outside shot at European football. And then out the blue after that, they go and they're brilliant and they beat West Ham away from home. And then they obviously finished the season with some relatively unpredictable fixtures. It was always obvious that they were going to struggle against Manchester City at home, and again playing Liverpool, who were free flowing, nothing much to play for except a Klopp farewell. These were sort of difficult games in the April and the May period, but they just can't have these ruts where they sort of fold away from home, concede too easily, are not as organised and are not as confident and are not playing with the same swagger and bravado as they have been doing for much of last season at home. So it's just about that consistency, which again comes with depth, because you've got the depth and you've got the options to tweak the tactics, and you've got more goals. You're not that reliant on only Manith. You can bring in another player that might get 7, 8, 9, 10 goals. You're not reliable on just the older guys like Willian to chip in with 1 or 2. Then they've got a real chance. So depth is very underrated. And the more that Marco Silva can get this summer, the more chance they'll have of getting a top half finish or better.
Yeah, definitely agree. Joe, do you have anything to add just quickly?
Yeah, I think the aim should be to try and push on for Europe. I think a lot of kind of that bad patch of form last season, for me at least, I kind of attributed to our players kind of being on the beach, which for me was a huge shame, that they looked like they didn't really care anymore. Not that they didn't care, but they just looked like they weren't as up to it as they were at the beginning of the season. They kind of knew that they didn't really have anything to play for. We were very safe from relegation. Didn't look like we were getting Europe. So it kind of just looked like we were coasting from game to game. Hopefully, I'm sure Marco wasn't happy about that and was having bollocking them. But hopefully next season we can see a proper good vein of form that continues throughout the whole season. We start strong, we end strong. Because if you want to get Europe, you have to be consistently picking up points. You can't be having these, like you say, Ben, bad patches throughout the season.
Yeah, it is crucial, and hopefully we can improve on the consistency next season. One to keep an eye on. But Ben, we are running out of time, but it's been great speaking to you. Thank you for joining the conversation, giving us a great insight. And hopefully Fulham can push on next season and bring in some big names as you suggested. So yeah, thank you for joining us. And for all you listeners and viewers, thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next one.